Now the pedal harp specifically has an incredibly large range, but it's not always easy to navigate. So today we're going to talk about the ranges of the pedal harp and the unique characteristics of each segment. Hi, I'm Danielle Kuntz. I'm a new music harpist and harp notation coach, and I'm excited to help you learn how to write for the harp with creativity and confidence. So our discussion is going to be primarily focused on the pedal harp. However, the lever harp is going to be very similar, except it won't have the strings on the top and the bottom. Now, personally, I like to divide the harp into 4 distinct ranges. If you Google, you're probably going to see most sources talk about 3 ranges of the harp, but I think it's helpful to split it a little bit further into 4. So we have the low register, the mid-low, the mid, and the high. And we're going to be talking about the 3 characteristics of each of these, and we'll talk about a couple of musical examples as well. So number 1, we'll be talking about the resonance, which means that different strings are going to ring for different lengths of time. For instance, a low register, those strings are going to ring for a long time. Mid register, they're going to ring for a moderate amount of time. High register, they're going to ring for a short amount of time. We're also going to be talking about the timbre and different colors that you can get from the different ranges, particularly due to the string material. And now finally, we're going to talk about the balance of the instrument. This isn't something you necessarily need to know specifically, but it's helpful to have an idea of what you might be requiring from the performer. Harpists balance the instrument on our shoulder and our right knee. There's a few different schools of thought. You might find some harpists balancing the harp between both knees, but that doesn't really change the purpose of why we're talking about balance. Now we're balancing between our shoulder and knee. So when we're playing in the mid ranges of the harp is kind of balanced between both of those two, so it gives us maximum mobility because we're not relying on either our knee or our shoulder. Now if we're playing in the extreme registers, you'll notice how I have to lean forward to reach the bottom of the harp. That means that my knee is no longer in contact with the harp and I'm relying on my shoulder for that. Conversely, when I'm playing on the top of the harp, you notice I do have to bring my shoulder back a little bit. Yet we don't want to do that excessively, but I have to bring it back a little bit just to reach the top range of the harp. So that means that I'm now relying on my knee. You also notice that when I'm playing in the extreme registers, I'm having to twist my body a little bit, which is not an ideal body position. We'll talk a little bit more specifics about that. So number 1, we're going to talk about the low register. Now, the unique aspect of this low register is that the strings are a different material. So on most harps, particularly most pedal harps, those strings are going to be made out of wire, and that's going to give it a more metallic-y sound. You will also notice that these strings ring for a very, very long time. That's the big characteristic of this range. Some of these strings can ring up to a minute if you don't muffle them, but they can sustain for a really long time. We're not going to sit here for a whole minute, but I'll play a few strings for you to get an idea. And you notice that they're still ringing. So this register is really great if you want to provide a big foundation, provide that bass line or strings that are going to ring for a long time to support what you're doing in the rest of the harp. So in coming back to the balance discussion of the low register, yes, we can absolutely play in this register. The left hand can reach it quite comfortably, the right hand not so much. So yes, you can bring the right hand down to play probably all except for the lowest octave of the harp. However, you don't want to do that for an extended period of time because that can pose an uncomfortable position. One particularly irritating example is Mars from Host the Planets, where harpists have like a page and a half of this. Now, because of the strain that is required, a lot of harpists will actually sit down the harp and play it like this. So yes, harpists can absolutely play in the lowest register of the harp, but don't do it for an extended period of time, especially with the right hand. Now the second register is the mid-low register. So this is the range that pretty much covers the bass clef. So anything that you find on the staff of the bass clef, that will be that range. Conversely, anything in the low register is going to be below the bass clef, or if you have to use the 8VB symbol. So the mid-low register is where we switch to the gut strings. So these are our warm strings. And they still have that long resonance that you have, although not quite as long as the low register, they still ring for a long period of time. So, but they have that more warm timbre. So because they lack the clarity of the wire strings, you have to be a little bit more careful when writing in this register. They have the potential to sound what harpists refer to as muddy. And this is just because the strings will continue to ring without the clarity, so you hear this blur of sound. Now you can use that to your advantage if you're trying to achieve a more murmuring sort of sound, but if you're trying to get something that's really clear and crisp, this is not necessarily the register for that. So one really good example of writing in the mid-low register is from Mahler's Symphony No. 5, the Adagietto movement. Now this register doesn't tend to cut really well through the orchestration, so if you're writing for this register in orchestra, you need to keep that in mind and write for something with a more sparse texture if you want this to be heard. Now the mid register is kind of our like bread and butter of the harp. This is the register that has the fewest problems that you don't have to worry quite so much about. This is going to be the range that's on the treble staff. You have a decent amount of resonance, but not the same as the mid-low register, so you don't have to worry quite as much about the buzzing. You do have the clarity, and you also have the balance. This is the comfortable register to play in. So one nice example that uses the kind of the mid registers of the harp is the Allegro from Franck's Symphony in D minor. Now the highest register of the harp is where a lot of harps will switch to nylon strings. This is a very bright register. The notes don't sustain for very long, so you get more of a percussive sound if you're playing up high. Now you can get more of a murmury sound, but because of the rules of legato, and you can't really get a legato sound with a note that dies away immediately, you would want to get more of like a... You'd really only be able to achieve that with some sort of like bisbigliando. Now this register, because it is more percussive, it does cut through orchestration pretty well, so you can use that to your advantage. One really nice example of the high register in orchestra is from Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet Overture. Now the last point to discuss is how quickly can it be to get between registers. Now this is something the harpists, we work well, and we can generally move around the harp fairly well. However, you do need to keep a little bit of time in mind if you're trying to move from extreme registers. So like both hands down low to both hands up high. That does take time because of that shift in body position. Whereas if you're going from the mid-range of the harp to the low, you don't have the same kind of shift. You're not going through like two levels. You're going to one level. It's just something to keep in mind in your writing. Also, it's a little bit easier for the hands to move together than it is for them to be going in opposite directions. That being said, the harp is a full range instrument. It's like the piano in that respect. So don't limit yourself to just writing in the middle. Expand it. Use the capabilities of the harp. Don't fight against it. Utilize all the different sounds and the timbres that you can get from using the full range of the harp. So that's everything for today. I hope you found this helpful. Let me know in the comments if you learned something new from this video or if you have other requests for future videos. In the meantime, I hope you will join my email list where I send out bi-weekly harp tips emails with little mini tips and strategies that you can implement when writing for the harp. So until next time, bye.